We are privileged, of course, to have Brian Calley here today, who's the president of SBAM. He has been an advocate for small business in Lansing for a long time. Did you want me to go ahead and move on to him?
Great.
Okay, sure. Small Business Association of Michigan recognized his efforts in state government on behalf of small business years ago when he was in the legislature. And when he assumed his role as lieutenant governor, he played a pivotal role in Governor Snyder's work on behalf of small business. It is for those reasons we on the board of the Small Business Association of Michigan were so excited to see him join our team. He brings a whole nother level to our opportunities to have a voice with small business. He has gotten us a seat at the table with Governor Whitmer and her staff in regard to those issues that are focused on small business. They don't always agree, but he's at least there with a voice for small business on those issues with the governor and her team. What I find especially good with Brian is that he generally takes a very collaborative approach to how he works with the folks at the Capitol, and it's especially good, during this time where, the us versus them within those situations is pretty high. So he seems to be able to break those barriers down a little bit, at least get them to entertain our discussion, as well as, of course, he entertain their discussion and bring that feedback to us. But at this point in time, I'd like to ask that you give Brian Calley a warm welcome from the UP.
Well, thanks so much for the invitation to come. I'm flattered that you invited me back when I was a no-show last year. I had in my head last year, and because it was such a tight schedule, and so I couldn't leave on time, and so I had a plane, and I was going to fly in, and just what a stupid idea, because it did not work out. But I'm glad this time I drove in. A lot of the way I had a driver, which was kind of nice. When I left office, I had to get used to handling all of my own logistics. But my driver is 15 years old now. My son, he's working on getting 50 hours that he needs before he hits 16. And I thought he just needed to toughen up a little bit. So he drove a lot of the way up here until the last part when I was just value our lives too much to let him drive the last little bit of the way. Thank you, though, for the invitation to be here. As Rich had mentioned, he serves on our board. We have 3 business owners from the Upper Peninsula that serve on the board of directors of the Small Business Association of Michigan. And the reason for that is because so much of the things that we work on, there's a high alignment between rural Michigan and small business needs. The number of issues where there's at least parallel, but usually very integrated interests, it's substantial. And so we see a lot of opportunity to team up and make good things happen. Also, as Rich had mentioned, I'm about a year out of office now. I can't believe how fast a year goes, and it's been a great year. This post-office time period where I get to have some other aspect of life outside of the job has been fun to rediscover all of the interesting and important things that happen that are not at the state capitol. So stuff like this right now would be a good example of that. I wanted to start with our entrepreneurial scorecard report. And let me give you just a little bit of background here. About 15 years ago, the Small Business Association of Michigan started the scorecard. And the scorecard was meant to look at all the different factors that impact the success of entrepreneurs that are operating in our state. And there's literally hundreds for this report, hundreds of different metrics that go into what we're about to talk about, because there are that many factors. And we have to do well on many of them in order to overall do well. But the reason for this report compared to a lot of the other economic reports that come out and kind of the top line economic performance numbers of our state. The reason for this is because there's a difference between what the overall economy performance is and what it is for entrepreneurs. Right? There are some areas where those things match up well, and there are many areas where there are unique challenges and unique differences and needs for entrepreneurs, especially those second stage companies, which is one of our key focuses. And we'll get to that at the end of the report. So we're on the 15th edition. This is the 15th edition. Later on this spring, when we get all the economic data for last year in, we will do a refresh, but this year is going to have a new chapter, and that new chapter will be looking at the states that are the fast movers and finding the similarities in their policy adoption. So those that have made fast or rapid advancement in the last 10 years as compared to us or anybody else, do they have similarities in the sorts of things that they have done? So we've got a ton of data on 50 states for 15 years, and now's the time to take it to the next level. But there are 3 different composite indexes in this report. So there are hundreds of different indices in it. By the way, you can find it on our website. Just look at, there's, no matter what business that you're in, if you go to sbm.org, this is featured on our website. You can have it for free. This is something that is just put out for everybody. It has literally hundreds of different indexes in it, and you'll find something that's very relevant to what you do in there. It's kind of specialized to what you do. But we also do composite indexes that look at 3 different things. There's entrepreneurial climate, that's kind of a static position relative to others. Entrepreneurial change, that looks at the rate and momentum of change as we look at ourselves of the past and where we're headed. And then vitality, which measures our rate of change compared to other places. So 3 different metrics. The first 2 are much easier to move than the third one. The third one takes a strong climate over a very long period of time to move. I'm just going to go through these next few slides pretty quick because they have mostly similar stories, and they're not in color, and I don't know why they're not in color. So, and it's not, when they were prepared, they weren't in color, so it makes it a little bit harder to see. But you'll see in the middle of that, you see Michigan's entrepreneurial climate. And in each of these, you'll see in that time period of 2010, 11, 12, you'll see kind of a bump where it went up quite a bit, and then it kind of settled down, and then a steady growth. And the industrial Midwest, those are the states that you would imagine, the Great Lakes states and a few others that make up the Midwest, and that's kind of our peer group, if you will. And as you see, Michigan lately has actually exceeded the peer group. So it's just steady, constant growth, exceeding our peer states. But the story behind that bump in the beginning is that our economy went down so much in that first decade of this century that the denominator on all of our fractions got really small. So you kind of have to take it, that was when Rick and I came into office, so I'd love to say, hey, we were just that good. But the thing is, the denominator on the fractions was small, so any economic growth was a big percentage, right? That's kind of the story for why you see a hump there. But the more important thing is, as you look at from the beginning to the end, that you see steady, consistent growth. That's important. That's a big improvement over what we've seen before. Now the change, these get more volatile. These different indexes get a little bit more volatile. You'll see Michigan had a big increase, and then we actually dipped down below our peers and now back up a little bit ahead of our peers. So remember, this is looking at our rate of change as we compare ourselves to the past. Right? How did we do this year compared to how we did last year? Not our rate of change compared to other states. And then this is the one where it's been really flat. And this is looking at our growth, that entrepreneurial climate compared to the improvements in other states. So what this would say is that it's been pretty flat. That would mean we're performing at about the same as other states, but maybe even a little bit of dip there at the end. So the lesson that I think overall we can take from these composite indexes is that you have to constantly improve or you will fall behind. Now, this is the more This part is always the more interesting part of the presentation, because we also go through and look at areas where we are top 10 and areas where we are bottom 10 compared to the other 50 states. Some of these will surprise you, many of them will not. But there's interesting stories behind them. So top 10 areas, lack of health insurance. We are now top 10. Michigan, in terms of lack of health insurance, is a top 10 state. More of our people are covered than other places. And a big part of this is our history, right? A state with the automotive industry, the inventor, the American middle class, and a lot of people, there's a base of people that have good health insurance because of that. But more recently, in Michigan, there was a policy decision made to cover more people through Medicaid, taking advantage of federal changes and a Michigan design or plan around that called Healthy Michigan. And that had a very substantial impact, about 600,000 people that are now covered through that. And so we are now a top 10 state. Why does this matter to entrepreneurs? Because this reduces the amount of uncompensated care transfer to the private insurance rates. It's one of the reasons why SBAM supported the policy change a few years. Why would SBAM want to support Medicaid changes? Because less uncompensated care in the healthcare system means that the premiums for those who do have private health insurance don't have to cover the rest of it. And we have seen about a 50% drop in hospitals of uncompensated care since that happened. I would also point out, too, just a few days ago, as the governor gave the State of the Union response, national television response, one of the examples that she gave in the history of working with other people and getting things done was joining with the Snyder administration on this particular policy change that I'm talking about. It really did have a huge, huge impact on Michigan. Home ownership rate, second. That's probably not I don't know, maybe it's a surprise to you, but this is one that people typically do watch quite a bit, and home ownership is high in our state as compared to other places. In fact, one of the issues that we're starting to get involved in is just lack of housing availability here in our state, quality housing, and we find ourselves at the Small Business Association really expanding into areas that traditionally weren't considered to be, core business issues. But when they affect the talent pool that we hire from, then all of a sudden housing and childcare and the education system and the primary education system and the post-high school part of it as well. Business liability costs, state business tax structure, again, very, very closely tied to policy changes that were made in our state over the course of the last decade. Business tax burden. There are a lot of different ways to measure that. Not all metrics have it exactly the same, but Michigan generally ranks very competitively in these areas. Workers' comp premiums as well, more policy changes that happened that resulted in that. The thing that we can take away from this slide in particular is that policy changes that happen at the state level do impact our overall competitiveness, the cost of operating in our state. So this is important. Now that U.S. News top graduate programs, 5th. I mean, that's pretty extraordinary. We do have a strong university system from top to bottom, literally from top to bottom in our state. A few other top 10 areas. The 4-year tech credentials, top 10, that won't surprise you, but ACT scores, that probably does surprise you, doesn't it? Because you've probably heard that our K-12 system is not preparing people very well. So this one might be a surprise to you, but there's a story behind it, and there's going to be a very different outcome when we look at SAT scores. And when I get to that part of it, I'll lay it out for why it is that we are a top 10, we're 5th in the country on ACT scores, and it's a very, very different outcome with SAT scores. The building permit growth, export intensity growth. By the way, the passage just recently, and the president signed the successor trade agreement for NAFTA, the USMCA, and that's really big for small businesses because literally 3 out of 4 exporters to Mexico and Canada are small businesses. 3 out of every 4. They don't make up 75% of the total volume naturally because there are some very large exporters. But most companies that export are small companies. So we very much looked at that as an important issue. The Michigan Economic Development Corporation, by the way, has an awesome export assistance program, and we always like for our companies to know about that. This is a teach a man to fish type of an approach to economic development, building a competency of exporting as opposed to just looking at it and, incentives get spent and they're gone, but knowledge of how to export endures. And so there's been some great export action in our state, entrepreneurial programs at our universities. 15 years ago, this was not the case. And yet today, most of our universities have excellent entrepreneurial programs. And then, and that's a response. That is a response to a demand out there, an opportunity that was unmet. University research and development, 7th. In industry research and development, 4th. Michigan is one of just a handful of states in the country that in public and private sector research and development, we are top 10. Right, there literally are just a handful of other states that find themselves in that position. This is a huge opportunity to take technology and transfer it into economic development. So when we look at this, we look at this report and we use it to determine, have the policy changes been working of the past, and where are some areas of opportunity, strengths that we can leverage to make better things happen. And then we're going to get to next, where are the areas where we struggle and maybe there's a policy response that is required because of that. So bottom 10 areas. Law enforcement employees, 45th. Now, if you're in local government, this does not surprise you. Local governments who rely on property tax revenue, there's been, during a time of economic decline, the property tax base is slow to come back. And that determines a lot of our law enforcement capacity across the state. So while the state itself has expanded or kind of rebuilt the state police employment base, local governments struggle with this because of the nature of the property tax system and how it grows. Hate crimes, 44th. I do want to, just a little bit of a caveat, not all states are as faithful as Michigan in reporting hate crimes. Right? So I think this metric might be a little bit skewed. I still put it there because I think it's important that any of them have, any hate crime is unacceptable. But I don't believe for a second that we have less than Texas. I just don't believe that. But I just think that our state is much more aggressive in how we report. The next generation internet, digital connectivity are two that are of particular interest. And I know that they're of high interest to you as well, because so much of our growth and capacity of the future depends on being connected to the rest of the world in this way. And it's one of those examples of areas where I think our overall mission for small business is perfectly aligned with anybody in rural Michigan, especially here. And while not like right here, you have great digital connectivity in this city, but in terms of across the landscape. And then highway quality, physical infrastructure, those two will not support you or just surprise you as either, except for I usually get the question like, wait, we're 47th? Who's better? There's 3 better. And it is true that infrastructure is a problem all across our country. It's not just in Michigan. We have very serious challenges here. Money is always going to be a struggle, but we have a high water table and a freeze-thaw cycle that is just much more extensive than most other places. So like in Minnesota, they have a lot of water, but they freeze and stay froze. And Ohio is pretty close to us, but most of Ohio is not in the Great Lakes Basin. And they're about, on average, 10 degrees warmer. So their freeze-thaw and ours, we're just in a space where you got water coming from below, water coming from above, and then freeze-thaw, freeze-thaw. It's always going to be more difficult to manage and pay for infrastructure in our state than it is in other places. That's why 50-state comparisons are a little bit tricky here. I mean, if you're in Arizona, you make a road and it pretty much lasts forever. So if there's a zombie apocalypse, go to Arizona. The roads are going to be great for a long, long time. But with respect to to Michigan, this is a major challenge. And it is one of those things, we think of it like a circulatory system in your body, right? Blood needs to flow and flow efficiently. People and goods need to move across our landscape efficiently, and physical infrastructure is important for that. Malpractice costs are expensive here. And then here's another one, prime working age residents, 45th. You know, by the end of next decade, the proportion of retired people in Michigan will be a little bit higher than Florida. It's kind of a wake-up call. If you look at the governor's program in response to workforce shortages, and in particular Reconnect, something that we're working with her on is skilling up more people, getting more people the skills required to compete and win in a 21st century global economy. That is, it's important that we get a higher percentage of our citizens up to that level because we have some demographic challenges directly in front of us. And then unemployment insurance and energy costs, both being challenges, except for unemployment insurance will have a dramatic change this year because we were in a huge deficit position, a very large liability with the federal government that was refinanced and connected together with an assessment to pay off the debt from the previous economic downturn. And that debt got paid off earlier this year. So the assessments on every single employee are going to fall. So I expect that metric is about to dramatically change. Again, because of a policy decision of the past. Here I want to point out the SAT. So remember, we were 5th best in ACT, and we're bottom 10 though in SAT. So why would that be? You know, back when I was in high school, in Michigan, everybody took the ACT, and the SAT was just if the college that you were going to required it. But then something changed. The policy changed to where now everybody takes the SAT. And you only take the ACT if you're going to a college that requires which many of them do. So this is a metric that really, probably better than anything else, separates out the general population from the college-bound students. So what does this tell us? This tells us that and by the way, most states, every student takes the SAT, and just a subset, college-bound students take the ACT. That's true in most states. So this is a good comparison. Our college-bound students perform better, on the ACT anyway, than most of the rest of the nation. Our college-bound students do better than most of the rest of the nation, 5th best. But our general population, including those who are not college-bound, do worse than most of the rest of the nation. So this is kind of an interesting metric or set of metrics to dig into, because if you were to just kind of look at the overall discussion, you'd think, well, kids don't get educated in our schools. Well, obviously some do. Some do very, very well, the ones that are planning on moving on. So what does this tell us? That there's a discrepancy here. And by the way, I don't think the message is everybody needs to be a college-bound student. That is not the message that I'm trying to communicate here. It's just that it's working for some people and it's not working for other people. In fact, it's working extremely well for some people and not at all for others. And so there's the Small Business Association of Michigan is one of the founding members of a group called Launch, it's a very unusual or kind of eclectic group of people working on education policy. And what the first set of recommendations that came out of that group, which very closely aligned, by the way, with the Whitmer administration as well on this, is that there are some students that are higher need than other students. And we just have to recognize that. If our attitude is really that we have to do whatever it takes for a student to do well. In high poverty areas, which by the way includes most rural areas, there are specific challenges that those students have that are outside of what more affluent areas are going to, challenges that more affluent areas are going to have. A student with a disability has a higher level of need in order to reach their full potential than and it's going to be more expensive, and we just have to have a system that recognizes that. And I think that this metric, the ACT versus SAT, is a good demonstration of that. That we have to have a system that is responsive to what the actual needs are. Now, and a few of these other areas, I was a little bit surprised to see the capital, the bank, commercial and industry lending availability being 40th, and because it has improved a lot. It used to be the worst. We used to be last, but this is an area where just access to capital generally still apparently a challenge. And then also university spin-out businesses is another one where I think we have a lot of opportunity. Remember the R&D, how we're top in the R&D, but we're 41st on spin-out businesses. We have a lot of patents too. I didn't put it up here, but we're pretty high in patents that come out of our universities. But the commercialization of those taking place here within our state, it actually is pretty low compared to other areas. So this would be a spot where I think that there is a lot of opportunity for a policy response to it. And then the entrepreneurial vitality was the slide that we had earlier that you saw as well. So those are the top 10 and the bottom 10 areas. I've got a few areas that kind of just group in others where we might be middle of the pack, but just important areas where things come together. Broadband and infrastructure. We consider broadband and digital connectivity to be part of the infrastructure discussion, that we ought to think of it that way, that it's not like an extra thing or not a nice to have thing. It's every bit as important as having a road. But I do want to point out too, water quality here, 13th, so 13th best on water quality. You wouldn't think that, right, when you watch the news, because Michigan is really serious about water quality. We actually do way more testing by far than any other place in America. By far we do more. Nobody's even close. There's Michigan and then there's everybody else. We do way more testing, way more examination, way more scrutiny than any other place in America when it comes to water. And yet still, so in other words, we find our problems here and other places don't even pay attention. PFAS, for example, we went all over the state to investigate and find the problems. Most states are completely ignoring this, and it's a problem in their state too. And even after all of that, the fact that we find our problems and most other places ignore theirs, still 13th. So it's one of the important things that we need to, one of the reasons that we do this is because it's important to have a base of facts to operate under, as opposed to try and manage things according to just individual circumstances and things that might be more anecdotal. Talent and education. We've got so many different areas where we have strengths in terms of our talent availability here in our state, and those tend to parlay very directly into areas where we have economic strength. And so what this really does suggest, though, I think, is that we have an opportunity. If you want to make a big impact in a certain area, it makes sense to have the workforce. If you've got the workforce, you got a shot at making a big play. If you don't have the workforce, you don't. I mean, I think it's as direct or connected as that. Business climate too. A lot of areas where we're very, very competitive. We saw some of the areas earlier that where we're not. Some of those can be affected by state policy. And so we can, so when we work with policymakers, we try to point those out. Here are some areas that we think that policy changes could really move the overall needle. So some insights that come out of it. One of the things that we always do, so you get hundreds of different metrics. What are the insights that come out of it? Poor infrastructure, we went ahead and put that. These aren't really in order, but we went ahead and put infrastructure on top because it's been in the report for a long time. And even though our state spends about $1.2 billion more in infrastructure than it ever has, per year, than it ever has, it's 20 to 25 years behind on maintenance. It could take a long time to catch it up. And in the package that was approved in 2015, I actually had to break the tie on that when it went through the Senate. So it was close, but it was only about half of what Governor Snyder and I thought that we needed at that time. It was just what we could get through at the time. The governor is right to focus on infrastructure still. Now that being said, at the Small Business Association, we oppose borrowing without some sort of repayment source identified for it, because that's kind of how we got into this mess in the first place with the Engler and Granholm administrations. But this should remain a top priority. This is one of our key weak points. The rate of improvement, we're still growing, but it does look like it's growing slower than it was in the past. This is something important to keep an eye on. You're standing still, you're falling behind. We continue to hold key advantages, especially with in-demand workforce. I know it seems like we're short all the time, but part of the reason why we're short is because we attract in investment because people want it after our talent. It's one of these things where the more you have, the more demand that grows for it in your area. Our business climate, in a lot of areas we have reached top 10, but overall we're still middle of the pack. And then, so it's better than being last, but again, you fall behind if you don't continue to grow. And then our quality of life, most of those metrics we do pretty well on here in Michigan, and we see in the more urban areas too some pretty substantial improvement, and really that you can verify by just more people wanting to live there. I mean, that's an important way to measure that. Second stage small businesses, I just want to point out a couple of things. Mainly, they're 7 to 10 employees up to about 100 employees. Companies that have less than 50 million in sales each year. So the reason that I'm kind of pulling these out is because we think of in terms of bookends, like really big businesses and startup businesses, but most of the action, most of the growth, most of the economic opportunity, most of the strength of our communities come from second stage companies. They're out of the startup phase and they're just growing. And so these are a specific strategic focus of the Small Business Association. And I just wanted to share with you, here's where our jobs come from. So if you like jobs in your community, most communities like jobs, here's where they come from. So 22% at 500 or above. So if you think of kind of big being that, the federal SBA definition says anything under 500 is considered a small business, but still 100 to 499 is still pretty big. But look at the 1 to 9, so more of the startup or early stage business, and then second stage business, 10 to 99. It's over half. Over half of our current jobs. It's also half of our job growth. So this is where the action is. We recognize, as part of a group of other business organizations, the 50 companies to watch every year, and so it's cool to see you guys recognizing in your backyard some companies that are doing some amazing things. But over the last, actually pretty similar time frame as this report, we've been looking at the 50 companies to watch in their job growth. And so we have 750 companies over that 15-year period that have been one of the 50 companies to watch. And if you look at just the 4-year time period when they got that award and what their actual job growth, not projected, actual job growth during that time period, I went back and added them all up. And it came to 12,506 jobs that these small companies created here in our state. That is Amazon-level job growth. And yet it was done in every industry you can think of, literally across every region of our state. And they're companies that rarely or never make the headlines. So we're intensely focused on that part of the pie chart, because that is where the most opportunity exists. So I think we have some time for some questions. I know this usually does garner a few questions, this presentation or responses. I always say, ask me anything. Nothing would be off limits. Don't worry about offending me. but I'm not challenging you to try to offend me. I'm just saying don't worry about it on whatever you ask. So Brett has a mic there.
You'll turn it on. You have a question.
Do your metrics take into effect the growing trend of workers that telecommute?
There's not a metric developed for that yet, or at least not. These are all official metrics that come from our government agencies. Now, the census has started some collecting data that we think could be used, but it's not in this report. It's funny you should bring that up, though, because I have a position that we just created at the association, and it's one that we're considering turning into I think it's well suited for a telecommuting type of a position. So real time within our association, we're examining this, and we think it's an area that with smaller, we have 28 staffers at the association, so kind of operate like a small business, or second stage business, as mentioned up here, and part of what we are, part of our competitive argument is that we, in the competition for good talent, is flexibility. And we've got another member that what she does, she has a marketing firm, and she hires dog lovers, and she lets them all bring their dogs to work. And like, you couldn't get that, like, in a big company, you're not going to get that. And now, if you're a cat lover, you're probably not going to work there. But when you go there, like, there are dogs running around all over the place. Yeah, it seems kind of fun. I mean, at least to visit.
So in January, we had to adapt to the new overtime regulations from the federal level. Now we're hearing that the governor may be looking at raising those even significantly more. Have you taken a stand on that? Our businesses are telling us devastating.
Thanks for bringing that up. That is there's a history to this that the Obama administration had looked at an increase before and was pretty aggressive in what they were looking for, getting into more management positions. So this is the mandatory overtime threshold, and so that effort eventually failed. The Trump administration went through it and really did a very comprehensive statewide or nationwide process to collect data and do all the relevant and necessary surveys, and they did a pretty substantial increase in the mandatory overtime threshold. So they took it to about 35,300, I think, and that's up from about 23,000. So not an insignificant increase. This year, though, the Whitmer administration has proposed to raise it higher. It was suggested that maybe that number ought to be 55,000, which takes the Obama administration number and just adds inflation since then. And that's where 55,000 comes from. There's also some suggestion that the ALICE rate, the United Way rate for a family of four, which is about 63,000, ought to be the level. When I met with the department on this and let them know that we have a high degree of confidence in the work that the Trump administration did on this. That it wasn't based on any kind of anecdotes. It was really based on the data that was collected nationwide with looking at what's happening in different regions as well, and they came to a conclusion. And not all of our members were happy even with that conclusion either. But it was one that we felt that their process was sound and it was a very reasonable outcome, and so support keeping it at that. I don't know for sure. They're trying to do it through a rule change. I'm used to paying attention to what happened in the legislature. Rule changes have taken up a lot more of our attention lately, and this is one that we plan to stay very much engaged on.
Hey, Brian, can you, I know you've had a chance to sit at the table with the governor and some of her staff on a couple of the business issues, and you've had a chance to describe that to us at the board meetings and those kinds of things. Can you kind of let us know kind of how that relationship's going and how receptive they've been to that type of discussion?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'd say that this administration is very much an open door policy. So they welcome conversations, communications, and collaboration on a variety of different issues. And there's room for disagreement, which I really appreciate. In fact, I was at an event where I was speaking at a panel, and the governor was up just before that, so I came in, and we've had this disagreement on road bonding lately, and so since the general public, or since the media knows that we're friends, they love to cover when I disagree on something with her, and so. But anyway, I walked in and she said, and my good friend Brian Calley is here. And I thought, okay, well, I guess I'm still at that status, even though we have a disagreement on the road bonding proposal. But that's something that a hallmark of this administration, which is very positive, is that there are plenty of times when we'll go into a meeting or interaction and everybody knows that we're going to just disagree on this one. And it doesn't stop there's still an ability to put on the table what the disagreement is and why the disagreement is there, and which really, from an association standpoint, we can't really ask for more than that. I mean, people believe what they believe, and they're going to represent what they believe, and so there'll be conflict and difficulties that come out of it. As long as we still have an open door to making the case, then I'm satisfied with that. And the other thing I'll mention is that. While the media does tend to cover conflict a little bit more, some of the areas where we talked about the Governor's Reconnect program that SBAM has been highly, highly involved in supporting and even organizing business community around, but also we're getting quite involved in quality and availability of childcare as being one of the key factors to people who want to be a part of the workforce and just simply can't right now. And it's a priority of the governor's, priority of ours too, and we're working directly with them on that too.
The working age population stat really jumped out at me, and I'm seeing a lot of other relatively ominous demographic trends. Do you think it's getting enough attention at the policy-making level? And if not, what could we potentially do about that?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think part of it is how you frame that message. I mean, we have demographic challenges in front of it. You know, that's one thing, but that's why I do the Florida comparison, because people think of Florida as being a retirement state, and probably by the next decade we'll have more retired people than them. So that's and it's good. We love our retirees, but we also need a workforce, and so you have to do it all and do it all well. A few of the areas though that. A few of the areas to keep in mind. One is there's this chance people have less kids than they had before. I'm one of 6 kids, and I have 3 now, and I would jump out of a window if the 4th came along. I mean, I just couldn't handle one more. I don't know how my parents did that. One time, somebody said, no, but by the time you have 4. Then it actually gets easier because then they can help. And I think those people are total liars. Like, I don't even believe that for a second that it gets easier. But so those kind of demographic challenges are just a reality. I don't know that there's really a policy change per se that can fix it. However, the immigration front is definitely this is ripe for and lively part of that conversation. It's one that we have started also engaging in. Is availability of workforce, and immigration has a part to play in that too. And while there's not that much at the state policy level that can be done to influence the immigration debate, we still want to lend our voice to smart immigration reform.
I guess this is my turn. Do you support or ask your small businesses to support K through 12 internships and job shadowing and maybe scholarships for trade schools or other kinds of schools? Yeah, definitely. So we've taken all of the above type of an approach when it comes to post-high school education. There are a lot of different paths that a student can take. The idea is building skills that are relevant for what the economy demands. And that can take a lot of different forms. And then the things that we used to call soft skills are now really hard skills. You know, they're the must-haves. And so the idea of building some work experience as you enter adulthood
it's something that used to commonly happen. And I'll do a little bit of commentary. We don't have like a policy per se on this, but you probably noticed that kids get protected from work today, like it's bad for them. It's going to take away from your schooling. It's going to take away from your sports. There's just no time for having a job. And it used to be we all had jobs. You know, everybody had jobs and you just learned how to resolve conflict and deal with people. And it's a concern, and you can solve some of that with things like internships and job shadowing opportunities and just at least getting some exposure. But the idea of kids making time in their schedule for a part-time job and learning how to show up for work on time and to deliver on expectations and that sort of thing outside of a classroom setting is, I think there could be a lot of value to that, even beyond the great work that's happening now in kind of career exposure in terms of what you do over the long term. Sometimes it's, what are you going to do right now, even when you don't have a lot of skills to offer, but you know, service jobs and that sort of thing.
Hey, Brian, can you talk a little bit about, I know there's been a big focus on purchasing, Michigan businesses purchasing from Michigan companies. Right. And SBAM's been heavily involved with that. I don't know that it reaches up here as much as the reach that we've had downstate with that initiative, but can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, there was a concept that was actually born on Mackinac Island, or at least it was unveiled on Mackinac Island at the Detroit Regional Policy Conference back in 2011, and that it's called today the Pure Michigan Business Connect. And the idea is that we have a lot of really big purchasers here in our state. Some of the biggest purchasers in all of the world are here, and so we're hearing a lot from them that they're having a hard time finding suppliers. And then we're hearing from smaller companies that are saying, I have no idea how to get into their supply chain. And so the Pure Michigan Business Connect was meant to do that. It's been, in terms of economic development programs, pound for pound, it's the most successful in the history of Michigan. Because it costs very little to run, and the overall job growth that can be directly attributed to it is very substantial. So it is a big success, but it's been tied more to manufacturing, and especially like things that you can buy, like a component, that sort of thing. Now there's some great work being done at the MEDC where they're looking to how to connect more service providers into those, because those big purchasers, they're buying a lot of services as well. And the Pure Michigan Business Connect wasn't really developed around services back then. So now they're investigating how do we transition this model and have it hit more businesses around the state. The other thing I'll mention too is that we've been working, in fact, we just featured it in our most recent magazine. We still do a quarterly magazine, like the kind you can hold. And there was, the cover story was about Meijer, which of course Meijer is not a small business, but their Bridge Street market in Grand Rapids, where they had a concerted effort, they want Michigan-made products on those shelves, that they have over 4,000 locally made products being sold, and that from small businesses that are being sold in that store. So I think the big businesses have a really important role to play when it comes to the success of small business as well. So we want to be intentional about connecting that. It's not an us versus them. It's how can we be successful together, because it makes Meijer more competitive too, to have that type of variety and local content. People love local content.
Hi, Brian. Speaking on behalf of some industries in the service sector, I know a lot of the focus is placed on manufacturing and so forth, but on the service side of things, typically it's entry-level positions, and what we're dealing with is the upward pressure of the minimum wage, and from our side, it's very difficult for us to try and recoup that money back. And then you throw in on top of that the base overtime pay, and a lot of these people need to be at a salary position, because you're dealing with people that oftentimes don't make it into work or whatever, and somebody has to cover a shift, and now all of a sudden you've got somebody who's working 65, 70 hours that week. It's a huge expense on these small businesses. And then you throw in, with the service sector, you're trying to hire younger and younger people because you want to get them that entry-level position like you had talked about. And then we bump into restrictions on the other side. You know, you're dealing with not skilled labor, but yet you can't have a 17-year-old, you know, wash dishes by themselves because they're touching a chemical. You can't have a 17-year-old clean a hotel room because they're not old enough to be unsupervised. But those are some of the issues and some of the problems that we're bumping into in the service side of things. Are there any crystal balls that you're looking at to help us try and wade through that issue?
Yeah, and I think the service industry is a good lens to see that through. But the same exact thing that you're talking about, I think it generally affects smaller companies more than bigger companies. And so this is absolutely right up our alley. We're about to do a pretty comprehensive rewrite of our tax policy, our overall tax policy positions and framework, and then regulatory as well. And one of the key components that we're adding in is that we have to consider all new proposals, we have to consider the cumulative effect. So what happens in regulations and with taxes and things is people look at it and say, well, it's not that much. All we're looking for is just this one thing. But it's that one thing on top of a whole bunch of other things that already happened. When I had the meeting with the Labor and Economic Opportunity Department director on the mandatory overtime threshold, that was exactly the case that was made. That you have to consider that we have minimum wage changes that just happened. We have family leave rules that just changed. We have a payroll fraud task force that's looking at criminalizing mistakes in payroll, and now labor peace agreements that are being added on top, and starting with the marijuana businesses, but as a condition for licenses, and a mandatory overtime rule that says all this stuff just gets added on and added on and added on. And any one on its own, you might not think there's a big deal, but all of it together is a really big deal, and it makes it so that it's more difficult for a smaller operator to even survive. And so it forces everything big. So if you are pro-small business, I've noticed that everybody's pro-small business. Like everybody's, I mean, in words anyway, everybody says they are. A lot of goodwill. I mean, there's people that make things happen in their community, members of the community. But many of the policy responses that have come out of kind of this current climate of this current business is bad type of narrative that's happening nationally right now. A lot of those policies actually force small ones out in consolidation into big businesses. And so I think that's an important factor to consider. So the way that you laid it out and articulated it is the way that it's a cumulative effect of all of these things are making it more difficult for a small business to survive, and it really does lead to more consolidation. So if you value having locally owned small businesses, then we have to consider that when policy discussions and decisions are being made.
Brian, just one last question before we wrap up. We've had discussions about how Operation Action UP and other organizations like OAUP and EUP can work more closely with SBM to advance the interests of small business. But can you speak to your view on how the businesses throughout Area Code 906 can become more closely aligned with SBM and strengthen and create a louder voice on policy questions of great import?
Well, one of the reasons why I'm here, and I was here a couple months ago too, and then I already know that I'll be back in a couple months again, just to regularly be here and a part, is I think that everything is relationship based, and the more that we can continue to investigate and intentionally match our interests up together, the stronger that we'll be. And so this is for us. We just see a lot of opportunity across the entire Upper Peninsula, but in so many different communities, we just see the very specific and real opportunity to team up. Where our agenda is exactly our statewide agenda is exactly the same as yours here. And that's probably not true of most business groups. You know, with ours, our members, you have to be small to join us. You can't join us unless you're small. And that's pretty unique. There aren't other, we're the biggest organization of our size in the country. And that is and I think it's a unique value proposition where we say we are just for small businesses. And we have almost 28,000 members now. And of those 28,000, 93% have fewer than 50 employees. To give you kind of a sense of the scope of this, we really are small business. And so that is, in so many, especially in rural communities, that is the entire economic base. And so it's just that much more important that we work together. SBM we are very effective. I mean, I hate to brag, but we are very effective at what we do. We have a presence on the ground all the time, good relationships with people. We take good care of our relationships. And we are intentionally bipartisan as well. So we get involved politically. We have a political action committee, but we are intentionally and fiercely bipartisan with that. And the reason is because we have a very diverse state. And we need to work with people with a lot of different sets of values and backgrounds and opinions on things to make stuff happen. And I think that lends itself well to the spirit of getting things done here. So I'll look forward for me being physically present, and then of course I think usually we try to see each other when you guys are downstate as well. Please do look me up or call me if you're going to be downstate, and if I'm in town, or we can stop together and say hi and tell me what you're up to. I'd love to help. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Brian.